Welcome, warriors. This week's episode is part 2 of 2. In this part, Lauren and I talk about what growing up was like after returning home from Jordan. We also discuss another trauma that occurred when her son was a little bit older than she was during her kidnapping. A trauma she had to face as a mother, a daughter, and a sister. Grab a tissue and join us as Lauren shares more of her life and her story with us. Let's rock. Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. As we continue with Lauren Burns' story, let me remind you who she is. Lauren Burns is the host of the Redeemed podcast. She was kidnapped at the age of 7 by her biological father and taken to Jordan. In 1992, NBC produced a made-for-television movie about Lauren's kidnapping and rescue. Lauren's journey of forgiveness and healing is an empowering story, and her goal is to share that story to encourage others to forgive and live a redeemed life. Lauren is a full-time physical therapist, wife, and mother of 2 boys. Before we hear the second part of Lauren's story, here is a review from MC Petty 7. Awesome! Thank you for the stories and encouragement. I look forward to every episode. I love this, MC Petty. So glad to know that you listen to every episode. Thank you. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Your comments and star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. Now, also, the Warrior Words Facebook community is now open. Come and join us for inspirational stories, lessons learned, and beauty bombs. And if you want to know what a beauty bomb is, you'll have to come join us in the group. Go to facebook.com/groups/warrior words. Then hit request to join, and a couple questions pop up after you hit request, so please make sure you answer those. And I look forward to getting to know you over there. Now, on to the show. Hi, everyone. We are back with Lauren Burns, and we are here for part 2. And if you missed that episode, part 1, last week, Lauren shared her story of being kidnapped and being rescued at the age of 7. And she shared a lot of just remarkable details about how God was involved in just about every step of that journey. And so if you haven't heard it, I'm going to suggest you pause this one and go to Lauren Burns part 1, and then come back and listen to part 2. So welcome back. Welcome back, Lauren. I am so glad that you're able to come back and talk to us a little bit more.
Thank you for having me back. I'm so excited to be able to talk with you and with your listeners again.
Yeah, it was a really good time, and so I'm very glad to talk a little bit more about, maybe about how you adjusted when you got back. You were so young, but everything was so different. So what was it like coming back to the States and back to your family?
Well, it's a good question because it's so much to unpack in the first, just telling the story and all the details.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just, and that's why I always say when I returned from Jordan and being taken and escaping into Israel, to me, that's where my story begins. Because I had so much trauma, age 7, I didn't know what I was going to be going through.
Hmm.
We literally, we lived in hiding. We moved, by the time I was 16, I think I had moved 14 times and
Oh,
changed
wow.
schools.
Wow. Yeah.
We changed my last name because my mom was very afraid that my dad would try to come back and get me or try to get me again. He has a lot of family, had some family that also lived in Dallas. And Rick and Beverly Lambert, I shared last time, they were private investigators at the time.
Yeah.
So they took on the task of hiding us. Beverly did that for a living. And so she was used to trying to find people. So she figured she could hide people too. And when we came back, it's weird how the media finds out about your story. We had the National Enquirer, we had People
Oh,
Magazine,
wow.
Reader's Digest. Every media outlet was hounding all my family members in Florida. Everyone that knew us, they wanted pictures of us. They wanted anything to be able to get a news article. And
Hmm.
so we had that going on as well.
And,
So
oh,
the
well, you're trying to hide and stay
yeah,
out of the public eye.
exactly. And I recently was listening to a cassette tape. I had shared last episode that I have cassette tape recordings
Hmm.
of these phone calls that my mom had. And this was a cassette tape recording of my mom talking about how she was afraid to put me back in school, but I had to go back to school.
Right.
Um, and she put me in a private school. She was afraid for me to be in public because I mean, nothing against public school, but that's where my dad had taken me from.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I was terrified. I was too scared to go to school. I was sleeping with my mom in her bed. I was afraid to leave her side. And so my mom had decided she was going to try to homeschool me the rest of that school year. And then the next year, put me back in school.
Okay.
Um, those are hard decisions to make.
Yes. Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Because a part of you as a mom, you're like, I want to push my kid to go forward. I don't want to get too far behind. But then you've got all this trauma and healing, and then she had to literally sell her jewelry that she had to pay the rent.
Mm.
And every time you move, it cost money.
Right.
So all those moves were costly, and she was running out of money. She wasn't working. She had just spent $80,000 to get me back. Every dime she had, she owed other people money.
Hmm.
So we packed up, moved to Florida, moved in with my grandmother, and we lived there for about 4 years so my mom could get back on her feet and start putting away some money again. And that was a good place for us because I was surrounded by family and that's what I needed. And I started going to school there in a little town in Florida. And so that was, and my mom got involved in church again. So those were good, fresh beginnings for us.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So you mentioned the movie
Mhm.
that eventually got made. How
Mhm.
long after this did the movie get made? Because if you're moving around and you're trying to hide yourself, and now, I mean, because this is a very public thing, it was a made for TV movie, right?
Mhm.
So how long after that?
There was a little bit of some details I don't know everything, and like I had said, I have a box with all of this information. And when I started my podcast and writing a book, I found all these documents, even the manuscript of the movie and some legal documents. I think it was tied up in court. Some big, like Warner Brothers wanted to do a big movie in the theaters. And then because there was some legal disputes between some of the people involved in our stories, like some of the men that were trying to sell the rights, I'm not sure. It was sort of held up for a little bit.
Hmm.
So the movie came out in 1993. I was taken in 1987. So at this
Okay.
point, I was older. I believe it came out when I was 13. My mom had remarried when I was 12. We came back to
No.
Texas after living in Florida for 4 years. My mom met an amazing man. I could not ask for a better stepdad. He just loved me. He was full of laughter, and all he wanted to do is just make people laugh. The best
Mm,
heart ever. You know, if you're listening and you know what it's like to come from a broken home, um, sometimes step parents can come in and try to be controlling and dominating, and this is the
mhm.
rules. And no, my stepdad was all about loving me, and that was an answered prayer. I remember, I don't know if you remember these necklaces. It was like a little prayer box. It's like a little box that you put around your neck and you can fold up a piece of paper and write your prayers in there. Well, I had
Oh,
one of those when I was a
yeah.
kid, and I had found it in my high school years. I had written on that little piece of paper, God, would you bring me a dad and would you bring me siblings? Because I so longed for a dad. And I found that little piece of paper years later, and I was like, wow, God, you just answered every prayer, but I had forgotten that I wrote, you know?
Yeah.
So at the time of the movie being released, we weren't living in fear like we were. I was a little bit older. My mom had remarried. We'd moved past that really scary time.
Hmm.
Um, and I wasn't in contact with my dad yet. That's to come. Um, but I was in middle school and I thought, I am so cool. I got a movie made about my life.
Yes.
And my mom and I would sit and lay in night and we would read our parts of the manuscript because they wanted to try to make it as real as possible. So they'd ask us to read our parts. So those were good times for my mom and I to relive, but also hard.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. So what was it like to actually see it once it was released? I mean, it must have been surreal to
It
see
was.
your story play out on a screen.
It was. I always say when I'm telling my story, I feel like I'm talking about someone else's life because it doesn't
Mm,
feel like it really happened to me. Um, and so it's like I'm talking about a movie. And again, I remember I was going to a private school during that time when the movie was released, and we watched the movie in my school. It was one of those a Monday night made for TV movies that they
okay.
used to have, and now it's on
Hmm.
Lifetime. We got to go to the big press release in California. I got to meet Mario Lopez. AC Slater
Ooh.
from Saved by the Bell was like, oh my gosh, so cool. So that kind of stuff, and I got to ride in a limo for the first time, and so that was really neat. When Marilyn Hemingway, that plays my mom, when she met my mom, she was just almost couldn't even speak. She was just so in awe of what my mom and I had gone through, um, and she had so much compassion for my mom and looked up to her for her bravery.
Hmm.
So that was really neat and impactful for me to see. So watching the movie and as through the eyes of a kid, I don't know what it was like for my mom, but I just thought, wow, I can't believe they made a movie about our life. I probably didn't really understand at that point at 12, 13, what really happened.
Hmm.
And then going into my middle school, a little bit older, I think those are hard years for anyone, especially girls.
Yeah.
I had a lot of anger towards God, to be honest. Like, why did you let all of this happen to me? Why did I have to grow up without my father? Why does my life have to look so different and so hard? I had to change my name. I never lived anywhere long enough to like get into sports or get into hobbies because we were always moving.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
my childhood just looked so broken, and I had all these scars left behind of hurt and longing. And I think I've shared before, I was already thinking, who's going to walk me down the aisle? Who's going to, be that person in my life? And this was before my stepdad came into my life. And even as much as I loved my stepdad, he wasn't like my biological father. And so I was angry at God because I'm like, if you're such a good God, like the songs that we sing in church,
Uh-huh.
and I had a
Uh-huh.
hard time singing those songs, then why?
Why?
And for the person listening that has gone through whatever difficulty, God can handle those questions. And in the midst of the really hard stuff, we're not going to know the answers until way later. And God can use, just like He is right now, He can use the hard stuff you walk through to minister to other people. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not that broken child anymore. Now I'm a wife, I'm a mother, and my boys have a totally different story because that's the way God redeemed my story.
That's right. That's right. Because it could have been totally different. Could have been
Hmm.
totally different. Wow. Yeah. I mean, if you think about, I mean, my son talks to me all the time about the butterfly effect and how, one little flap of the wing or one tiny little change can change so many people's directions.
Hmm.
And I think we talked the last time too about your dad's one action of taking you impacted so many people.
So many. It,
So,
it wasn't just me. And, and now that I'm older and I have friends that have gone through divorces, I look at that. The divorce is not just between the two people and their children. Everybody it
yes.
affects. It's just, and same thing with my story. When my dad took me, it affected my stepmother, all of his siblings, so many people, so many family members I'll never know. But God can, if you allow him to, heal those broken places. I call it wrestle because that's really what I did. I still have vivid pictures in my mind, 13 years old, 14, 16, 17, in my bed, crying and like wrestling with God of why. And I want the relationship with my dad. I want to know who he is. I want to know who my siblings are. Why is this my path? And I had to walk through forgiveness. God had to
Yeah.
show me how to forgive my father, even if my dad never was going to say the words I wanted to hear. Um, and I think that's true for so many situations. We want to hear
Yes.
that magic word that's going to fix it.
Right.
And the fixing comes between me and Jesus, nobody else. And so it's something I had to learn through a journey of being in life group, being with people praying over me. I had a village of people praying over me. Um, and my mom is amazing. The power of forgiveness started with her. She was the example for me. She encouraged me. And I hope I could have done this if I was in her shoes. She never badmouthed my dad. She always
Mm,
encouraged me, Lauren, write him a letter. And so I would write letters to my grandmother who lived in Florida, and my grandmother would mail them to him. So that way he didn't know where we lived. And then he would
right.
do the
Yeah.
same. So we played this charade, right? Um, And so I did that for a long time, and those letters were hard to open with his handwriting and the photos, and it was hard. And then I started calling him, and my mom was like, encouraging me to call him. And I would be on the phone crying, my heart racing. I was scared to call him. And, when I heard his voice, all those memories came back. But she wanted to leave the door open of communication. And then when I got to that age of 13, 14, 15, I really started questioning. I wanted to see him. I wanted to know who he was. So we made that happen. We went to a public place. We went to the big mall, and I saw him for the first time. And that was hard. But now being a
Right.
mom, I can't imagine how hard it was for her to watch because guess what? After we went home after that, I was an emotional mess and drained. My mom had to pick up the pieces.
Mm.
Um, so that was our roller coaster for a little while until my high school years when I could handle things a little bit better. I've never shared this part of my testimony, but there was a time we lived out in the country, and he was in Dallas, and he was wanting to come and see me. And I kept telling him, no, no, no. And he had come to my mom's house. He'd come to our home before, which is, again, forgiveness and shocking. Um, but this certain time, he kept saying, I really want to come. I'm about to leave to go back. I'm leaving Texas. This is my last chance. And I just told him no. He showed up. It was Halloween weekend. Well, Halloween was when he took me. And for so many years, Halloween was just traumatic. I didn't celebrate Halloween after that. My mom and I would just stay home. It just brought so many emotions, but my
Mhm.
dad didn't realize it, which brought anger, by the way. Like, how does he not
Understandable.
know?
Yes.
So he shows up, and we live way out in the country in the middle of nowhere. And he knocks on my door. And I go to the door, and it's glass, and I can see him. And I froze. It was like I was back in Jordan again, all that fear. And I
Hmm.
ran into my parents' room, and my mom was like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "He's here." And she said, "What do you mean he?" I said, "My dad, Ollie, is here." And she looked at me and she said, "Lauren, I have seen you cry. a long time. It is time for him to see your tears. It's your time to talk to him. And so she prayed, and I went to the door and I took a breath and I was like, you're right. And sometimes you have to get mad enough to like say the things. And he came in, we sat down, and I said, we need to talk. And I think I was like 17 at the time. And he sits down and I just let it all out. I said, do you know why I didn't want you to come? This is the anniversary of you taking me. You taking me from my mom. You taking me from my culture, from the United States, from my language, from my everything. This is the anniversary of you changing my life forever and ruining our relationship. And he just said, I didn't know, which hurt.
Yeah.
How do you not
Yeah.
remember? But that was a healing. That was this start of healing for me. I wasn't shoving it down anymore. I faced it and told him, and I think that that was just a God opportunity for me to have that conversation with him.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Your mother is strong and
Mhm,
brave
mhm,
and so faith-filled.
mhm.
So
Very.
faith-filled. And what an example.
Mhm,
I just to listen to you talk about her encouragement, the fear that she must have had as a mother,
mhm,
yet she encouraged you to have to have that opening for that relationship, to keep that door open.
mhm.
Wow. I don't know. I don't know that I could have done the same.
No, and
Yeah.
that's not possible in every situation.
Right.
If someone's listening and they're in an abusive situation, or, not every situation. My dad was not abusive. He was not an angry or mean person. He made
Mhm.
a really bad mistake, very costly mistake. So you have to have boundaries and you have to follow what God's calling you to do for you and your
Right.
family. But yes, she was the example of forgiveness for me. And it's like I compare it to like peeling the layers of an onion.
Hmm.
God was just shedding those layers for me, and that was another layer opening the door for me to confront my dad. And then later on, I was able to talk with him again and tell him, I forgive you for what you've done. I'm not mad, which is freeing. I don't have anger
Yes.
anymore. Um, and I got to, tell him, because I believe in Jesus and Jesus died on the cross for my sins and he forgives me. So who am I to hold anything against you? Um, which is, I don't know what God's going to do with those conversations. That's not for me to know. I lay
Right.
it in his hands. But it's freeing that I don't have to hold that anger anymore.
Yes, it is. I talked with Dr. Karen Silva at one point, and her podcast is called Forgiveness is for You.
Yeah.
And that's something that I can't say that I always believed that, but
Mhm,
it's something that I learned. And um it really is, because if you hold on to unforgiveness or hatred or anger, it's hurting you. It's not
mm,
hurting that other person. It's hurting you. And
mhm.
until you can forgive, it's I think something else my son says, living rent free in your head. It's
Yeah.
it's your stress level, it's your heart rate, it's you know, your headaches and all of that. And
Mhm.
I just it is so freeing to be able to forgive someone and let that let God do with that
Yeah.
what he wills. Yeah.
But it's a process. Like you just said,
Yeah, it's not easy,
you know,
right?
at at 16 and 17, I didn't have an understanding. I thought, forgiveness meant to forget. And I
Yeah,
really had to realize that's not what it means at all.
right,
And like you said, forgiveness doesn't mean to say that what he did was okay. That's
right.
not what it means. And forgiveness, holding on to that bitterness and anger, like you just said, it's not affecting him. It's just hurting me.
Hmm.
But these are things, it goes against what you naturally think.
Right.
Um, so those are the things I had to learn.
Yeah. And like you said, you were 16, 17 years old. That's most of us at that age aren't we just don't know what forgiveness
Yeah.
is, and we don't, yeah. So it's a lot harder. It's hard for us as adults
For
too.
all
And
ages, yeah.
I mean, and some things come more natural or more easy, not more natural, but more easy to forgive, I think. And so you have to take each one as it comes and work
Mhm.
through it. Like you said, it's a process.
The
It's a
process. And
process.
I had a village of people praying. I mean, it
That
was
helps.
not, yeah, the power of prayer, the people praying over
Yes.
my life. And God heard all those prayers, like that little one I put in my little necklace, and that I forgot. I was like, oh, you did. Like, I have a brother and a sister and a dad. Oh, you did that.
It is so amazing. I mean, I've written some things down,
Yeah.
and you go back to them, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, that was answered. Okay,
You
thank
have to
you.
slow down long enough to see the answers, especially in the life we live now,
Yeah.
because we have so much going on. If we don't slow down and look and see what did God answer, we're going to miss it, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. And that's one of the things though too that I like to ask people. And so I guess this is a good segue to that is seeking beauty. And it's hard. It's a hard concept to get used to the idea of seeking beauty in a traumatic event. And
Mhm.
maybe I think most people don't see it as it's happening, but to be able to, like you said, slow down and maybe look back.
Mhm.
Can you look back in your trauma and see any beauty that may have come from that?
Yes. I think the person I am, I'm pretty open. I have a lot of compassion because I've been through a lot of hard things starting from a young age. So I think that empathy is beauty.
Mhm.
Um, my faith in God, we've walked through some hard things. It's like you can't tell me that there's not a that Jesus isn't real and he doesn't love you and he doesn't chase after you because boy has he chased after me.
Mm,
So that's
yeah.
the beauty. Would I wish all of this to happen? Actually, maybe as hard as it is, because if I can share my story and encourage other people, it's worth it. And the mom that I am to my boys and the wife I am, to my husband and the things I've walked through, it's made me who I am. Um, and one day, who knows, my siblings and my dad, and who knows, God's not done with my story yet.
No,
So that's the beauty is seeing his fingerprint throughout the years.
that is beautiful. Um, and I did want to ask you about another traumatic event that I know that happened in your life as an adult, because
Mhm.
you just mentioned, the mom you are to your boys and how that wouldn't have been possible had you not walked through this previous event. Um, but you had an event happen that when you were the mother, when your son was a little bit older than the age
Mhm.
you were when you were kidnapped, and it was hard on him and it was hard on you. And so if you don't have to give a whole lot of details,
Oh,
but
sure.
if you could share with us what happened and how maybe how you reacted to that event maybe a little differently
Mhm.
because of where you've previously been.
So, this is also a good reminder. I went through a lot of stuff young. My mom did too. And life still happens. It doesn't make you immune, like you get one bad thing and you're done. No, that's not the way it works. So my parents adopted my second cousins when they were 2 and 3 years old. They were little, or 18 months and like younger than that. So I became a big sister again. They drove to Florida, picked the girls up. My mom had no clue how old Latu is. She's like, I don't need diapers. I don't need. I was like, Mom, and I was 25. I was just got married, didn't have kids. I'm like, Mom, I think they might still need diapers. So she calls me from Florida. She's like, Lauren, take your credit card, go to Walmart. I need diapers. Like these are babies. So Chloe was the youngest and came into my life, and her sister Alexis, and they just needed lots of love, and it wasn't easy. They had a lot of all the difficulties being adopted and feeling rejected at a young age. And when Chloe was 16, Did not have a driver's license. She had taken my dad's truck. My stepdad had passed away 2018. He'd already passed away. Um, and that was hard too.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, I
so
imagine.
Chloe had taken my stepdad's truck without permission and was driving late at night, fell asleep. My my oldest son had just graduated 5th grade. So it was 2 days before this happening. We were at my house with Chloe and Alexis and my mom and my family and celebrating my son's 5th grade graduation. 2 days later, I get a phone call from my mom, wakes me up on a Sunday morning. Chloe's been in a bad accident and the police are on the way. Ambulance is on the way. I don't know. I think it's bad. So I jump out of my bed and I start driving, not knowing where I'm driving. And I drove out like past an hour, going really fast and calling people asking for prayer. And when I got there, the state troopers were there. I saw my dad's car against a truck. It had gone over one of the, like a deer fence, those really high fence that keep the deer in
Mhm.
the properties. And the fence wasn't damaged.
Oh, wow.
And my mind couldn't wrap around, just in shock. And I get out of the car and I start to walk, and then I begin running. And then the state trooper was like, "Why are you here?" And I just fell to my knees. And I pointed and I said, "That's my sister. That's my dad's truck." And he just said, "Ma'am, you shouldn't be here. We don't want the family here." I said, "You have to tell me what happened." And they just began to tell me that my sister had passed away at the scene. And I said, "My mom's on the way. I can't tell her. I don't want her to walk as far as I walked by myself. You have to go and meet her at the car." That's all I could think of. My sister Alexis kept calling and calling, and I was like, "I can't tell her. She's like, everyone's driving. I can't tell her."
Right. Yeah.
So my sweet sister, in a blink of an eye, from going from a 5th grade graduation at my house 2 days later, her life ended. So how do you tell your son that? And he said, "Mom, I love Grandpa. But, Grandpa was sick for a long time and he's older and I get it. But Mom, Chloe, that means anybody can pass away. It's not fair. Why? She was just here." So that was the first time that my child really understood death, and we had to talk about it. And I actually, at the funeral, we talked about the potter and how God is the potter and we are the clay and he shapes us. And I remember reading a book by Lisa Turkhurst, and Lisa talks about in her book of the pottery being shattered to dust. And I stood in front speaking at my sister's funeral, and I said, "I am beyond broken. I am the dust. I don't know how to get through this." But the potter takes that dust and he puts it in the clay and molds it because that dust makes the pottery bigger and stronger. So I'm like, "Okay, God, take the dust and make me stronger and do your will with me." And so, because of my faith, and I've seen everything God's brought me through, I don't understand it. I will never understand why my little sister passed away at 16. But I know that God is still good. And I know that
Yes.
He will see us through this. He has a purpose, He has a plan. We live in a world that's fallen and broken. We live in a world of sin. It is out of our control, but I'm still going to stay faithful and I'm still going to look towards God in every single aspect. And so those are the conversations we had with my son. We did counseling. He didn't
Mhm.
want to leave the house, and so we did counseling, and that really helped. Getting back into school really helped because I just didn't want him to isolate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. At that young of an age, just like you shouldn't have had to deal with,
Yeah.
the fighting and not necessarily the fight. I mean, I guess it was a big fight, meaning your father took you away and, I guess a different type of fight. But so you had to deal with that disagreement between your parents as to where
Mhm.
you should be. And then your son has to deal with death at an early age and
Mhm.
with somebody so young. And it's so astute. What he says is, if she can pass away at
Mhm.
16, then that means anybody at any time. And a lot of us, I think, we don't think about that. We just
No.
think that everybody's going to just, live to 95 and pass away
Mhm.
peacefully in their sleep. And
Mhm.
that would make life a lot easier for us, but it doesn't work that way. It's
It
the
was hard at that moment for me as a mom because I had to really step up. Thank God for my stepsister. She came in and I needed that because my mom was crumbling. I mean, she just lost her daughter. And so I had to make the decisions for their funeral arrangements, the casket, all the things. And I lost my sister. I'm worried about my mom. I'm worried about my other sister and then my son, and he didn't want to leave my side. So he went with me to the funeral home, to walk the cemetery, to pick out the casket. And at moments I'm like, is this the wrong decision? Is this too much for
Mhm.
him? But he didn't want to leave my side.
Right.
What do I do? And after the fact, now that he's a little older, we've talked back through that. I'm like, Cooper, did I make a bad decision? Was that wrong of me? And he was like, no, mom. I wanted to be with you. Right where you were is where I wanted to be. Because how many times as parents do we look back and think, did I make a mistake? And he's like, no, I needed to see all of that and I needed to be with you. I'm like, okay. But again, I might make mistakes, but I can pray and God, just if I've messed up, could you just take over and fix this mess?
Yeah.
Because I don't have the answers, and I'm trying
Right.
to hold it together for myself too. So it's a lot when trauma hits in that crazy storm. There's probably not a better word, but that's the word I use because there's so many pieces going on at one time.
Right. And you pointed out, you're dealing with your own grief.
Mhm.
You're trying to hold it together for your son and teach him the lessons, the age appropriate lessons that
Mhm.
he needs to learn. You're trying to help your mother and be strong for her
Mhm.
and your other sisters. And it's a lot for one person to
Mhm.
handle. And if you didn't have the faith
Mhm.
that you had grown all of these years, it probably wouldn't have, I mean, it's
Yeah.
never easy, but it would have been even more difficult to
Yeah.
handle and to teach and to support and love everybody involved.
Mhm.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. God shows up. He
Yes.
gives you peace. He
Mhm.
gives you the strength. He gives you the wisdom. And when I didn't know how to help my son, he provides the counseling and the people. I had other moms come alongside me. I had a mom in the midst call up and say, "Can I take your younger son to Six Flags or whatever?" I'm like, "Yes, please. Yes, take him." Um, People show up because at those moments you can't even make decisions. My
Right.
prayer group was giving us food and dinners and gift cards, and I couldn't. So I had a whole village of people pouring into me, and I just nodded my head.
Well, more evidence of that faith-filled
Mhm.
community and what we all, I guess, maybe aspire to become. That type of person
Mm.
who just gives as Jesus asks us to do. What is it? No, I'm gonna mess it up, like Matthew 26, where Jesus talks about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and visiting the imprisoned um, and it's just those are the things that we all need to do and be there for others. And
Mhm.
wow, I got chills when you were. Oops, I just knocked something over off my desk. I got chills, hearing you talk about that, and I just you have such a traumatic yet faith-filled
Mm.
story, and just all of the wins and successes and just tremendous blessings that have been rained down on you and your family in the midst of all of the trauma. And
Mm.
it is so glorious to see how he's worked in you and how you've allowed him. to work in you. And so,
Yeah, thank you. It's not easy. I mean,
no,
thank you very much. He's brought us through a lot, and it's not easy. You pull one of my
no.
friends aside, they're like, "Oh yeah." I mean, you know, and all the emotions come out. I don't hold them in. I've had a lifelong of that. But I think that when you do open up and you do let those tears fall, it allows other people to be real and to cry with you because
Mhm.
guess what? They're hurting too.
Yeah,
Um, so you don't have to like fake it because it's too hard.
right. Yeah, very much so. So, but that leads me into how you are thriving today. Your faith is obviously thriving, and you have mentioned the box in the garage with the cassette tapes and how that kind of led to your own podcast and your own journey. So, can you share with us a little bit about your podcast and your goals for it?
I'd love to. And I think it's a good reminder. I could not speak and do these podcast interviews or, speak in front of a church 3 years ago or a year ago or 10 years ago. It's in God's timing. And
Yes.
so, if you're listening and you're like, oh, I want to be able to do these things, it's in God's timing. God, it's a journey. I've had a lifelong journey of God healing me and bringing me to a place where I can share. The reason it's a box in my garage with dust is my mom, I couldn't open it up. It's hard to go to your past. It's hard to pull this stuff out. But when God calls you because he's prepared you and he's healed those broken places and he's giving you the word to speak truth to people, he might say, Lauren, open that box. And I'm going to say, okay, Jesus. So I open it. And when God, like, I felt God calling me to write my book. And I never ever, I'm like, I have dyslexia. I'm horrible at spelling, like the worst. So I'm like, are you sure you're talking to me? And I started writing. And then I talked to someone and they said, Lauren, you need a platform. I'm like, what's that? Um, and they said, you should do a podcast. I like to talk. Okay, I could maybe figure this out.
Hmm.
And so I open that box and there's my mom's journals written. The whole story's right there. Yes, I have the movie, but the actual story is written in the box. The cassette tapes, the voice recordings of all these conversations are better than the movie. And so it's like God just starts to say, Lauren, I'm going to give you the time, even though you work full time and you have kids. I'm going to give you the resources. I'm going to show you the way. So this is still a journey for me. I'm still in the process of trying to write a book. The Redeem podcast I started about 3 months ago, and it's been amazing, Heather. Like I told you, in this process, I've actually interviewed every single one of the people that have a part of my rescue mission, my rescue story. If you would have told me, if you would have called me 6 months ago and said, this is what you're going to be doing, I would laugh at you and hang up.
Yeah.
But when you say yes to God, even though it might sound crazy, he opens the door. And
Yes.
he's put all of these men in my life and I've interviewed them. I've told them thank you. And people say, well, why did it take so long? I didn't want to open that box. That's why it took so long.
And it's God's timing. So maybe these other people weren't ready as well.
That's right.
So, and now you have, and truth be told, I haven't listened to them all yet. So I cannot wait to go and
Okay.
listen to the ones that I still haven't heard. And I'm going to put the numbers in the description so that everybody can go find those because
Thank
they
you.
so everything I've heard, it's just I draw jaw dropping, like jaw on the floor, and it is you. It sounds odd in my head to say you have a blessed story,
No,
but I
I
think you
do.
do. I think you do.
I
And
agree with you.
um, and maybe somebody listening might say, "What? She's crazy," but there were so many blessings.
Mm.
You wouldn't be here today in this capacity
Mm-mm.
if so many things were not orchestrated the way the Holy Spirit orchestrated them. And
M-
so,
My
yeah.
dad believed in arranged marriages, so I don't know what my life would have looked like.
Oh wow, yeah, because that is part of the
Mm.
culture that you were
Yes.
being raised in. Yeah.
Yes. Mhm.
Wow. Well, I was wondering, lastly, if you have any, because you've given us so much, but if you have any last warrior words that you would want to share with our audience, um, just about anything that you have shared or experienced, um, I'd love to hear them.
I think the biggest thing I keep hearing myself say, and I think I say it so much because there's so many times I felt so alone. Whatever you're going through, whatever your circumstance, you're not alone. There's many, many times that I felt alone. Like, God, do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you see the pain I'm going through? And the answer is yes. Yes, he sees you. He chases after you. He leaves the 99 to chase after you. 100% is not just a story in the Bible. It is truth. It is real. He loves you so dearly, but there's times in our life that it's hard to feel that love. I've been there. He
Yes.
just wants so much good for you. So don't give up. And I wouldn't be here talking today if I did not have a place of people that surrounded me to pray with me, to encourage me, to point me back to God. I need people. And it's sort of scary to step into a Bible study, to step into a group of men or women or a church. It's uncomfortable. But when you find your people, it's life changing and they will be there for you. So I highly encourage you, get out of your comfort zone and find that one person to connect with. It will just be life changing.
Yes. People are so important.
Mm.
Yeah. Yep. In fact, I don't think Jesus ever did anything. I think he said somewhere about, I think when he was being persecuted, he says, I never spoke privately. I always
Mm.
spoke publicly, and he always spoke with groups and um, larger, I mean, communities even.
Mhm.
So, I mean, they didn't have online back then, but um, but community is so important, and finding your people, finding the
Mhm.
people that can support you and your family with whatever situation you're going through. So,
Mhm.
all right. So, where can people find you? The podcast, obviously, but
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram, L Burns PT, Facebook, Lauren Burns Redeemed. And yes, my podcast is called Redeemed. It's on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. A really good place is my website, laurenburns.net, LAURENBURNS.net. I have some photos of the movie and the magazine covers, and I have a place if you want to be a guest, you can fill out a form or just to say hi.
okay. Well, I'm going to make sure all of those links are
Thank
in the
you.
description, the show notes, and we will also be getting this to YouTube. So we'll tag you in there so your subscribers can find it as well. So
Yes, great.
so Lauren, thank you so much for giving us 2 evenings of your time. Because yes, we're recording this in the evening, but I am just so grateful for your story, your time, your willingness to share everything that you've been through, and to help us with just being able to learn more about forgiveness and to learn more about faith and community. So,
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much for your time, too.
oh, well, thank you. All right, everyone. Talk again soon. Thank you. I'm noticing a recurring theme with a lot of the stories that we hear here on the podcast. Something a lot of people who have experienced trauma, which let's be real, all of us, but something we all need to face at one point or another, and that is the need for forgiveness. Whether whether it's forgiving another person or maybe even forgiving ourselves. Forgiveness is an important step in the healing process. But like Lauren said, even forgiveness itself is a process. But we need to also remember that this process of forgiveness does not absolve or excuse someone for that thing that they did. Forgiveness can be downright hard, but it is also downright necessary if we want to be free. I heard evidence of this with Lauren as she was able to say that her father made a terrible mistake. The words she chose were powerful. Her ability to use the word mistake showed her freedom. There was no anger, no malice in that word choice. Which leads me to something else that I heard, which was that her forgiveness was not conditional. When she forgave her father, there was no expectation of anything in return. It's kind of like something I've heard a lot of people say, and that's bless and release. She forgave him because it was what her healing required. And what happened afterwards was completely up to God. Whatever God chooses to do with her forgiveness or our forgiveness, even if we never know what that is, even if we never know anything about it, it's all up to God. And it's all in His timing, not ours. We may never know the impact our forgiveness has on someone else this side of heaven, but we will be able to experience our own healing and our own freedom. And remember, you don't have to have the same story Lauren has. You don't have to experience the same things she did. But you likely have your own traumatic experiences. Have you started your healing process? Have you started your forgiveness process? What is one step, just one? What is one step you can take this week to move forward in your healing journey? Something to think about this week. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.